Just as we do not waste time to prove or disprove the existence of Zeus or Apollo, a true atheist should realize that it is ridiculous to argue over the existence or non-existence of God. The same thing is true of feminism. What's interesting to me is that Kierkegaard had written a 3-page essay in defense of women's rights, but he doesn't use the normal feminist language of attack and protesting. What does he do instead? By using irony and comical remarks, he shows that women have rights to get proper education. Irony is precisely what someone like Adler lacks. To understand how irony works, we can have a look at Kierkegaard's essay. For instance, he argues if we are to take the matter seriously, women should have more rights than men, because it is they who are more prone to gain knowledge than men. In the story of the fall, it is not Adam who listens to the snake's philosophical lectures, but Eve. Consequently, it is Eve as a woman who has a craving for deeper knowledge and a talent for philosophical speculation. To give you another example, according to Kierkegaard, the witch trials in the Middle Ages should have been enough to convince people that it was always the woman who had a deeper insight into nature, not men. In fact, men were always afraid of this deep insight. That's why they suppressed women. By utilizing a comical tone, Kierkegaard uses people's own conservative and religious language against them. And such an approach is far more effective than many harsh attacks. Take Voltaire's case as one of the best examples, whose criticism of Leibniz is far more memorable and more effective than thousands of forgotten philosophical essays that were written against Leibniz. So it could be argued that Kierkegaard's solution to the problem of action versus belief would be irony. Imagine how an ironist behaves. A true ironist would go on to live in the world among other people and their preposterous social norms. To an observer, the actions of an ironist might seem sincere. The ironist might seem to be following the norms of his society and so on, but inwardly, nothing could be further from the truth. On the contrary, if a person like Adler were positioned in such a situation, he would feel uncomfortable because he cares what others think of him. He cannot resist showing his true beliefs. Even if such a person used irony or sarcasm, he would make sure everyone was aware that he was being ironical and he didn't literally mean what he was saying. But for Kierkegaard, a true ironist is someone who uses irony without caring at all if other people realize that he's being ironic or not. The ironical attitude towards the world should be manifested inwardly. Of course, this doesn't come without risks. Imagine what would happen if people took your ironical attitudes literally. Yet again, a true ironist wouldn't care.
May I ask,
yeah.
People who actually remain in the aesthetical state can use irony as well, or it's
actually
irony,
no.
They're transferring to another stage?
Okay, let's put it like this. What you usually hear, I don't know how much Kierkegaard you've read, but what normally people have in mind when they think of Kierkegaard are the 3 stages, like the aesthetic stage, the ethical stage, and the religious stage, right? But there is something before the aesthetic stage. It's living immediately, like living in immediacy. An immediate person is somebody who is like, I don't know, basically the average guy on the street, your average Joe. He doesn't understand how the world works, and he doesn't care. I mean, he's happy. He doesn't, or to use a Heideggerian word, he doesn't live authentically. He just lives. He takes life for granted. So this person doesn't use irony. Irony, if you use irony, this, of course, let me be clear. Like, this person enjoys life. I mean, he's actually very, very happy. But if you use irony, your enjoyment becomes reflective. So you reflect upon life. So basically, yeah, in the aesthetic stage, it is essential to use irony to make a transition from an immediate person to an aesthetic person. Did I answer your question? I hope.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So when confronted with a realized subjective truth, taking drastic actions is not the right response. A more earnest person prefers to conceal the decision and to test himself in silent inwardness in order to see if it might not deceptively be the case that he, because he is weak, needs the strong outer manifestation of the decision. If a person can persevere in silent inwardness, can endure being totally changed without changing the slightest outwardly, he then easily can take the striking step. Strangely enough, viewed under this light, Kierkegaard's ironist has ethical characteristics. His ethical message in his book on Adler is that to be able to be entirely as one ordinarily is, to live among the daily and continual recollections of the old, and yet to be changed in the deepest ground of one's being. Yes, that is the art. Isn't this how an ironist behaves? Moreover, when someone claims to have found the truth, he should know that his outward behavior cannot possibly have any effect on the truth. A truth would not become less true if we kept silent about it, and it would not become truer if we expressed it loudly at every opportunity. So, when Archimedes runs naked in the town and shouts, "Eureka, Eureka," this extreme outer manifestation of his internal feelings has nothing to do with the value of his discovery. In Kierkegaard's view, the discovery is only an excuse for such a behavior. It does not justify it. There is a third problem with immoderate outward manifestation. When a person acts out frantically, it will be less likely for other people to find their subjective truths. For instance, many people consider themselves to be religious, but they have religion only as an idea. They keep the actual religiosity at a distance. They might even go to church or perform certain religious rituals, but they imitate these actions like sheep in a herd. These people, they do have religiousness, but inwardly they have not made up their minds about when it is to be used, what it is, or how it is to be used. Their decision to be religious is completely the opposite of how the knight of faith decides to be religious. At least Adler had one positive quality. He was truly shaken by the experience he had had. But when other people who attend religious ceremonies solely as a social duty see Adler's extreme actions, they will become relieved. They will feel as if though they have undergone a deep spiritual experience. This feeling deceives them into thinking that they are religious, but they cannot possibly be religious because their beliefs are not affecting them inwardly. Their beliefs are not subjective. The situation is comparable to going to the movies to watch a horror film. We might become so shaken to feel as if though we were in the same situation as the actors. But as soon as the movie ends, this intense feeling dissipates. This, of course, does not mean that intense inward feelings are enough. A person cannot just sit in a room and think inwardly. People talk and do things. Because we are human beings and because we are social animals, we have a deep need for communication. So it should not be surprising that when someone thinks they have discovered the deep truth, they have a desire to communicate it to other people so everyone else would also benefit from that truth. That being said, there needs to be a balance between what we say and what we believe. One way to curb our passions in speech is through knowledge. A Greek who believes in Zeus could have the highest intense feelings about his religion. He could even talk more passionately than any Christian. What distinguishes these two are the concepts they express. A pagan's religious education will expose him to different concepts than a Christian. Therefore, it is absolutely essential to be educated in what we have faith. Many people call themselves Christians without having read the Bible. This problem is not restricted to Christianity. I have personally met people who call themselves communists. They go to protests, they form rallies, they distribute flyers and so on. But they have not read a single page by Marx. We all have encountered people like these. And as firm as such people might be in their beliefs, in Kierkegaard's view, an action which does not have an educational support behind it is unfounded. It does not matter how intensely we feel that our actions are right. We must also be able to justify them conceptually. Being deeply moved and education are two important pillars of an action. It is education that will ultimately save the person from making a mistake. Even to the most earnest ethicist who is out upon the waters of reflection, it can happen that he at some time makes a mistake for a moment. But he will quickly discover it because he tests his life in order to see where he is. Even to the most earnest ethicist, it can happen that he is at some time ensnared in a self-deception for a moment, but he will soon discover it. It is not enough to act. And ethics which only commands you to act is not doing a very good job. Good ethics tells you to be ready for your mistakes. And the only way you could see your mistakes is through proper education and knowledge. Finally, we come to the fourth problem. It is important to point out the strange relation between aesthetics, religion, and ethics. Even though, according to Kierkegaard, the ethical stage is higher than the aesthetic stage, and the religious stage is higher than the ethical stage, there is no such thing as acting ethically without acting aesthetically or religiously. When someone acts ethically, to a certain extent, he is acting aesthetically, while his actions are partially religious. We've already pointed out the crucial role that faith plays in ethics. It is by virtue of faith that an ethical action becomes inward and subjective. But not only must an action be ethical by virtue of faith, it must also be aesthetic. We have indirectly touched upon this fact. An ironist is essentially an aesthetic being for whom everything needs to be approached ironically, as if life were a play. Yet it is precisely this playful approach that gives merit to an ethical action. Let's remember Abraham's actions. His actions are religious, ethical, and aesthetic. By virtue of faith, he maintains his subjective truth, and in the process, by acting as an ironist, he is acting both aesthetically and ethically. In fact, Kierkegaard takes the aesthetic dimension of an action so seriously that, in either or, he proposes that in the matters of unhappy love, under certain circumstances, the proper response to be to take the aesthetic action by committing suicide. The very fact that this possibility is offered shows us the importance which an aesthetic action has for Kierkegaard. So it is not surprising that he criticizes Adler because his actions were not aesthetic enough for Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard does not object to Adler's transformation. If anything, it was an excellent quality in Adler that he had become so transformed that he could not rest. Nevertheless, the extreme outward manifestation of this transformation gave an aesthetic appearance to what he did and what he said. An ethical action implies the existence of aesthetics, but aesthetics alone does not imply an ethical action. Consequently, we cannot formulate maxims out of aesthetics alone. If we were to formulate such a maxim, this maxim would be, one ought to amuse oneself. This is in fact the maxim by which A or Johannes the Seducer lives in Kierkegaard's Either Or. Such a person would only act to avoid boredom. That being said, we need to keep in mind how Kierkegaard does something drastic in his ethics. Unlike Kantian ethics, in which one cannot derive a categorical imperative out of emotions or irrationality, in Kierkegaardian ethics, it is essential to do so. One of these maxims concerns love. It is perhaps the most important human emotion that gets formulated in Kierkegaardian ethics. This kind of ethics is inherently rational and unknown to reason. Kierkegaard's understanding of love is not what we in the 21st century think of when we use the word love. For us, the word love normally has romantic connotations. Furthermore, Kierkegaard's understanding of love is different even from the classical age. For him, love is not agape, the love of God for man and of man for God. It is not eros, because he thinks erotic love only shows you the beautiful dizziness of infinity without giving you the infinite. Likewise, Christian love for Kierkegaard is not philia, brotherly love, and neither is it storge, familial love. For Kierkegaard, love is something practical. Therefore, dealing with love falls under the domain of ethics. From our modern perspective, Kierkegaard appears to be the least likely person to understand what love is. On so many levels, he is the worst advisor when it comes to love. His own personal life was a mess when it came to romantic relationships. Let's not forget how he hopelessly fell in love with Regina, and when she finally accepted his marriage proposal and decided to marry him, Kierkegaard took his proposal back because he wanted to be with his sweetheart Melancholy. In his journals, we find out what happened after he proposed to Regina. She said yes. The next day, I saw that I had made a mistake. Penitent that I was. My vita ante acta, my melancholia, that was enough. This, in a nutshell, shows how Kierkegaard felt about romantic love. So what could such a person who would rather be melancholic than to be with the woman he loved tell us about love? The trick to answering this question is to realize that Christianity is at the heart of his understanding of love. However, it would be a mistake to assume that this understanding is orthodoxically Christian, because nothing could be further from the truth. Like the rest of his philosophy, the concept love is a subjective truth that each person has to understand for himself. This fact alone tells us why his conception of love is so different from everyone else's.